about myself in the White House. When I got out of the White House, I started reading some stuff. People said it's very shocking.
This week, Kellyanne Conway, senior counselor to President Trump. Hello, I'm Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. This week, we are speaking with the first woman to run a successful winning presidential campaign and who went on to be senior counselor to President Trump. Kellyanne Conway was one of the preeminent pollsters on what women think and want. She also has been a regular panelist on To the Contrary for, as I recall, it was about from the mid 1990s until you signed on with the cruise pack.
Pretty much, that's right. I'm very happy to be a regular panelist on To the Contrary, and congratulations on your 31st year, Bonnie. It's truly remarkable.
It's something else, I'll tell you that. You have always made women, in terms of policies, you're front and center. Your polling company made your name, made your fortune or whatever. Polling mainly for women's magazines, on women's products, et cetera, et cetera. What's the biggest thing you've done for women?
Well, first of all, I hope that my job in the White House and as a public servant helped many women. So I worked in administration that, especially pre-COVID, was able to rebuild an economy that worked for many Americans. A record low unemployment among women, record labor force participation by women. And I believe that it was an economy that worked for three different groups of women: the job creators, the job seekers, and the job holders. And that last group, Bonnie, is really the one that I think most politicians, right, left, and center, don't pay enough attention to. They're always talking about the job creators and building a business. And I think that's wonderful. You and I have done exactly that. But that's a very small percentage of American women. Then you have, fortunately, less than 10% or 5% at this point of women seeking, looking for jobs also, who are unemployed. But the vast majority of American households, many of which, the increasing number of which are being led by women, are the job holders. And they're saying to themselves, when did the job no longer become enough? So I think the deregulation, the energy independence, the economic stimulation, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, frankly, also, I know I worked in a White House that, whether people wish to believe it or not, here's a fact. It was a great place for women and working mothers. I write in my new book, Here's the Deal, my memoir, that I looked up in a meeting one morning at 8:20 a.m., call it a Tuesday, and I noticed in that meeting of about 11 or 12 principals that 5 of us, all of whom had the highest rank in the White House, assistant to the president, were all working moms. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Mercedes Schlapp, Ivanka Trump, Brooke Rollins, and me. Between us, we have 19 children, 12 daughters and 7 sons. At that time, they were ages 2 to 16. And sure, you've had many women over the years on your show. You've had many sponsors who say, we are family friendly in our corporation. Yes, sir. Just look at our handbook, pages 568 to 574, and we'll show how family friendly we are. But in the Trump White House, it truly was. I never asked for special privileges as a working mom, but I felt very protected, very supported, and I felt very empowered as a working mom.
And you talk in the book a lot about how he really didn't treat you any differently than he treated the male staffers. Did that surprise you at all, given his reputation, given the Hollywood Access tape, et cetera, et cetera?
It didn't surprise me, but I can understand why it surprises others, particularly if they just buy into cherry-picked caricatures or this comment or that comment. I guess it didn't surprise me, Bonnie, that Donald Trump had empowered and equipped me to succeed, first as campaign manager. And yes, we were successful. I am the first successful woman to manage a presidential campaign, but he's actually the first Republican to ever even put a woman in that position. Democrats have done it 3 times. Michael Dukakis, Al Gore, and John Kerry. But Donald Trump's the first Republican to do that, which is pretty remarkable. But if you look at his history, if you look at how he has conducted his business, he has routinely and traditionally elevated and empowered women to positions of power in the Trump organization, on the Trump hit TV show, The Apprentice, and then again in his campaign and certainly in his White House and his cabinet. Somebody once said that Donald Trump, he enjoys the company of both men and women. He listens carefully to the briefings being put forth by male and female staffers, but he confides in the women. And that actually has some resonance and some truth, great truth to it. I do also say in the book, though, speaking of women around Donald Trump, that he confided in us, he consulted us. I certainly was senior counselor to the president in every sense of the term, but he reserved his fear for one person, and that was Melania Trump. She's the original counselor of the president. She is the person that he would consult with routinely on any number of matters. And she's got a great savvy sense for the way things are being covered or being perceived.
Give me a hint, because I kind of don't understand it.
Well, that's his wife. Why in the world was Bill Clinton listening to Hillary Clinton about healthcare?
But she was a product of Yale. Whatever you want to say about Hillary's strengths and weaknesses as a political advisor, she had a great education, and she was a partner in a law firm.
Yeah, the Rose Law Firm. And look it up, everyone. You'll have a real field day and look to see who went to jail over that.
But getting back to the question.
Yeah, well, her husband was the president. So as First Lady, she had a platform called Be Best. And I think when First Lady Michelle Obama said, let's move, and told us all to do jumping jacks, and she planted the garden, everybody applauded that and said, terrific. I don't think the child obesity rates went down very much, but I never denigrated it. That was her platform, main piece of her platform. And this First Lady, Melania Trump, had Be Best, where she tackled the opioid crisis and cyberbullying and other just sort of healthy living for children and then teens. And, frankly, Bonnie, the president, First Lady, worked on the public policy issue of opioids and the poly drug crisis together. And I was a staffer who supported that at the highest levels. And the drug overdose came down. Those are just the facts. They went down for the first time in 30 years. Not to belabor the point, but President Trump did many great things for all Americans, even those who say they don't like him and didn't vote for him either time. You have to be the president for all Americans. And, frankly, I read stories recently on CNN, NBC, and Politico, all of which say there's great palace intrigue and knife fighting in this White House, 13 high-profile departures from the vice president's office. Kamala Harris is the first woman of color, first vice president of color, quote, made history. Terrific. Why are people leaving? Why have 21 Black staffers left this White House? I mean, why do they feel uncomfortable that they're not supported, they can't get their job done, or don't have people listen to them and take their advice? So I'm very happy to work in the White House where I was listened to, even when the president and I disagreed on a policy issue. I know he heard me. And even if he went in a different direction, I was fine with that, because I'm there to give the advice, to lay it out, to help properly brief a president and a vice president. And then their names were on the ballot, so they are the ones who should absolutely make the decisions.
You raised the question of African Americans departing the Biden administration. You talked in the book about working with Bannon and several other high-level staffers who were incredible, all men, incredible backstabbers, going behind your back, denigrating you to the president. And you basically called it, for lack of a better cliche, a den of thieves. How did you, and I heard one time, somebody told me you came out from an interview defending the president and said, oh God, I need a shower.
That's not true. That's been written about, and I've denied that. That's not
okay. All right. I heard it. You denied.
We can't have it both ways. We can't say Kellyanne's so loyal to President Trump.
But let me ask you this. I was leading to this question, which was, how did it feel to work with a crew like that?
That's a different question.
They use curse words all the time. And in my 20 plus years of of having you on the show. I never heard you curse. You're an eloquent speaker. You don't have to stoop to that. The guys were F this, F that. How did that make you feel?
Sad for the country, because the president asked us to work together as a team, and we did during the campaign. But something changed when he won, and I think it changed for the people who weren't expecting him to win. And they all of a sudden had to take credit for that, take credit from the woman, which is silly since I have a living, breathing video catalog of what I thought every single day and what our strategy was. They don't. They were probably still asleep when I was on TV talking every morning about why we're going back to Wisconsin and why we're pulling out of Nevada a little bit and focusing more resources in Pennsylvania and Michigan, for example. I was quite transparent and strategic about it on a daily basis. But I also, look, I also say in the book that I was raised by very strong women, a house full of women, 4 Italian Catholic women, adult women raising me in Little South Jersey, Bonnie. So I was accustomed to manhandling jealous little boys. And I tried to do that, but I don't understand why. And I don't understand it in the Biden White House. I didn't understand the Trump White House. I think there's plenty to do. This country has so many needs that there's plenty for everybody to do without getting in each other's way or competing for space and place. And there too, I have to credit President Trump, because he did not allow those guys to dismiss and denigrate me and castigate me the way they wanted to. And that started when I first got there. But guess what? They really didn't last. Very few of them lasted. I watched them come in. I watched them go out.
You sure did. And you get a lot of credit for lasting as long as you did in an administration, which you earlier talked about departures from the Biden administration, but no administration has ever been such a revolving door as was the Trump administration. Did it ever feel like chaos to you in there?
Well, we used to hear that word a lot. And I think chaos and crisis is now what I see everywhere. In this America, infants can't get they can't get formula to eat. We're paying way too much at the gas pump in the grocery store. There's obviously chaos in Ukraine since Putin invaded it after Donald Trump left office and Biden got in there. There's chaos in a nuclear capable Iran salivating, looking at our best friend in the region, Israel. There's chaos at the southern border. I mean, there's chaos and crisis everywhere we turn and very little response. I think 10 of the scariest words I read every Friday are, quote, the president and the vice president have nothing on their weekend schedules. How can that be? Why is that? And so what I think was unfortunate is that while we were trying to work, while we were trying to deliver on those promises and suss out what could be done when with the Congress, when the Republicans were in charge the first 2 years, Bonnie, and then the Democrats were in charge the next 2 years, trying to work with governors, trying to meet the needs of a global pandemic that no one saw coming, and on and on. All that while we're doing it amidst the investigations and the subpoenas and Russia collusion. For 3 years, we had to hear about that. 2.5 to 3 years, we had to hear about something nobody ever found to have changed an election. Where are the apologies? How do the taxpayers get $45 million back? How do they get 2.5 to 3 years back? And yet we kept pushing that boulder up the hill every single day. But I think the work is just too important to give into the caricatures or the hate or what strangers think of you.
You said the work was too important. Is that what got you through as the longest serving or one of the few longest serving high-level officials in the Trump administration?
Yes, because I certainly gave up a ton of privacy and time and money, millions and millions of dollars to work in the White House. You don't do these jobs for the money. You actually don't do the jobs to go run toward the gold mine of life-changing money, which I had stared at long and hard, Bonnie, after the 2016 election. Lots of contracts, lots of offers, really into the 8 figures at that point. But I'm glad I took the job because I learned at the age of 50 how meaningful and consequential public service can be. And I tell young people routinely who ask me, if you can fit in public service or nonprofit work, at some point in your career, do it. Do it. It doesn't have to be forever, but just do it because the work is its own reward. Yes, this is an amazing country filled with beautiful people who have fabulous ideas about how to course correct, about how to make policies better and stronger and work for more Americans. And I think the gift of my career, Bonnie, which you know because I've been on your show for 25 years or more, I think the gift of my professional career, Bonnie, has been to go out and literally talk to thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans in focus groups, looking at the data in the polling night after night, day after day. How's it playing in Peoria? What do they love in Lubbock? I'm the one who got on the plane to go figure it out and ask them. There's essential wisdom in people. And I really do wish our elected officials of all political stripes would listen more to the people. I mean, I think they're talking at them and talking for them more than they're listening to them. And that really helped in 2016 to win that election against the Queen Bee herself, Hillary Clinton, with a majority of female voters against every odd and every press clip and every poll. And it certainly helped to keep me focused on my work. I like to say I wasn't being paid to read about myself in the White House. When I got out of the White House, I started reading some stuff. People said it's very shocking. But, you know, as I tell people.
And it's hurtful, right? It's hurtful.
Sure. I guess, yes, it's hurtful.
You talked about reaction to you. Did you get a lot of negative feedback when you were out there explaining away the Hollywood Access tape where he says women like to be grabbed by their private parts, beginning with a P, and says all these pretty terrible things about, you know, that makes you think that he doesn't think much of women. And you were his representative. I remember seeing you on every show, every day for months at a time. That was an October surprise when it was leaked to the media. But how did you feel about that?
Well, I said how I felt, and I'll repeat it here. I said, like Melania Trump said, Mike Pence said, and Donald Trump himself said when he apologized, he said, I don't recognize those words, but obviously I said them, and they're horrible, and I don't mean them. I don't feel that way about women. So he apologized right away, which is saying something in today's political culture. And I said the same thing. I write in the book, Bonnie, first time I've ever talked about it, a private conversation Mr. Trump and I had in the corner of the elevator bank coming off the 24th floor, really on, so Access Hollywood was late on Friday, October 7th. So this is Saturday, October 8th, going into Sunday, October 9th, when we're going to turn right back around and go to the second debate in St. Louis. And Mr. Trump had seen all these headlines and all these chyrons on the TV saying they're going to force him off the ballot, they're going to embarrass him and expel him out of the race, they're going to replace him. And he asked me, can they do it? And I said, no, they can't do that. I said, it's too late to print new ballots. And, you know, you're not a quitter. I know he's not a quitter. His wife had put out a statement that day. I helped write. The vice president Governor Pence put out a statement that day that he and Karen Pence sent to me, and I handed to Donald Trump. So it was a very heady day. And I said, you know, you said it on the tape, but Bill Clinton did it. And his wife stood by him. Hillary stood by him for decades. And if somehow we fall apart, we're going to hand the whole damn thing to Hillary Clinton. We're not doing that. And, you know, fortunately for me, I had my person at that time, George Conway, my husband of many, many years, who was insistent that I stay in that race, who was insistent I take my shot and be that campaign manager. Didn't just urge me, but almost insisted that I take my shot, as they say in Hamilton. Don't throw away your shot. And I did. And, you know, people say, Bonnie, without Kellyanne Conway in 2016, I don't think Donald Trump would have gotten elected president. That's debatable. But
how is that debatable? You won that office for him. You're polling. You're being his representative when he was under fire about women's issues. You did all that.
Well, I appreciate that. I was a staffer. I appreciate that, Bonnie. I do. And I appreciate you saying it when I'm sure that he didn't get your vote. So I very much appreciate you saying that, woman to woman.
You don't know that. You don't know
true.
who I voted for.
That's true. Or if you do, and that's your right. But I guess back to this, I mean, people should know that George and I have a lot in common, not least of which is we both accepted very big jobs in the Donald Trump administration. He just changed his mind. It's America. You can do that. But I certainly never would have moved an entire family to Washington, D.C. and taken a job at that level had we not done it as a family or as a couple, committed and rowing in the same direction. But, you know, I also, I think Donald Trump did something very important in that final debate October 19th, 2016, that's maybe back in the news now, Bonnie, is something we've talked about and to the contrary so many times over the decades. He turned to Hillary Clinton in response to a pretty predictable question by Chris Wallace, the moderator, about abortion. And Hillary did her usual women's right to choose thing, thinking, I've got this all to myself, yay. And Mr. Trump turned to her and said, you're the extremist on abortion. You would rip that baby out of its mother's womb an hour before it's born. And people went, ugh. And I thought, wow, I'd never heard all these pro-life, stalwarts talk that way, so unafraid to call out what they see as extremism. So now pro-choice, does it include partial birth abortion, late-term abortion? Does it include sex selection abortion? Does it include abortion long after nonpartisan doctors say a baby can feel pain? So I think where religion and morality did not help everybody decide one way or the other, pro-life or pro-choice, science and medicine have stepped in. And it was Donald Trump, improbably, Bonnie, who, for this Manhattan male billionaire, for whom most of his adult life had been pro-choice, became the most pro-life president in U.S. history. And I think that, too, is just the power of transformative thinking. We all change our minds on big things.
And let me ask you about that in terms of the midterms that are coming up quickly, and even the next presidential election. If the Supreme Court goes anywhere near in deciding the Mississippi case where the leaked draft opinion went, is that enough to motivate women to the polls and men who are pro-choice to the polls? You and I have had this discussion. I ask this, you'll smile, I hope, when I say this. We've talked about this, that in the 70s and 80s, abortion, pro-choice candidates motivated women. That was like the number one issue to go vote. But in the 90s, O's, etc., it really didn't work anymore. Women took it for granted, or maybe they didn't want, choice anymore. I don't know what. But do you think it will work because of the Supreme Court and what we're going to see by the end of the end of the term, and that it will so enrage women in particular that it will motivate them to go to the polls in a race that they may not otherwise have wanted to?
First, I would say that thankfully women on balance are neither single issue thinkers nor single issue voters. But I think we've already seen the answer to your question in part, which is you already see an uptick in the number of Americans saying abortion is important to them. You didn't see that before the Roe leak. And in fact, in the Dobbs case, and in fact, Bonnie, if you go back and look at the 2020.
What about women? Women more so than men? Because I know you're polling women.
Pro-choice more than pro-life. Remember, there are pro-life women, there are pro-choice men. It doesn't easily fall along gender, and people should recognize that. But I do think both sides will be very motivated to go to the polls. Remember, if you're pro-life, you believe that a baby's being murdered, so you're very engaged to go to the polls. If you're pro-choice and you think that Roe could be overturned, you're very enraged to go to the polls. So I think you'll see that on both sides. What I don't see, which is pretty remarkable, is any kind of course correction on all the other issues that Americans say are vexing and perplexing them, like inflation and immigration and the economy and national security and the like. It's mind-boggling to me that they don't see that. But I'll stick with this issue for a moment. What I believe has really helped the pro-choice movement is roughly about 26% of Americans in polls can accurately describe what Roe versus Wade provided. What did that opinion mean and what did it not mean? And I think many people, I know many people are ascribing their own points of view on abortion, whether it's abortion anyone, anytime, anywhere, essentially the Democratic Party position now, or abortion with some limits, regulations, and restrictions, or no abortion, which is, that combo is where a lot of Americans are, including American women.
The Supreme Court majority, and likely, although not definitely, the opinion is at the extreme right. No protection anymore.
Well, we'll see what they say about returning it to the states. I mean, we'll see. Even people like George Conway say there's no constitutional right to an abortion. It's probably a state matter. Many people believe, he's a Federalist Society founder, many people believe that that is a matter of state law, that we should not have a federal law. So we'll see where they come down on it. But in terms of motivating to the polls, yes, that is a big motivator. And I would say this is in my book. Here's the deal. I have a whole chapter called Life of the Party and talks about the arc of public opinion on abortion over the years. And the one thing I noticed, and I still can't believe, so I wanted to put it in the book quickly. In 2020, when you had modified, but we still had the Democratic National Convention and then the Republican National Convention in that order, Bonnie, Republicans were far more likely to mention abortion and life than the Democrats were. So to your point, where this, talking about women's right to choose, abortion rights was a staple. I would say it was the most popular thing talked about in many of these Democratic National Conventions over the years by anybody who was speaking, was almost conspicuous by its absence. I think Kamala Harris kind of mentioned it a little bit, but you had Michelle Obama, Barack Obama, Jill Biden, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton. Very little. They talked a lot more about race than they did abortion in 2020. If you just look at the quantitative analysis the Washington Post put forward, and it's very telling. Last thing I'll say is you're absolutely right that it's been less of a motivator at the polls. The one exception to that was 2012. President Obama was running for re-election, and you had a couple of these Republican Senate candidates speaking terribly. I mean, I like to think inartfully is not what they meant, all the way to terribly about the issue. And that cost, I think that engaged many more Democrats to come out on the issue. And I think it cost a few seats.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Bonnie.
That's it for this edition. Let's keep talking on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And visit our PBS website, which is pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next time.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation.
For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/to the contrary.
Be more PBS.